So let's talk about religions for just a second, because these are two of the biggest religions. And when people talk about like religions and they start naming them and making lists of religions, these two always make the list, right? So let's talk about religions for a second. So things to remember as we enter into this conversation is that all religions are worldviews. I didn't know if you know this, but all religions are worldviews. Okay, not all worldviews are religions, but all religions are worldviews. Meaning that dictates, kind of like what you all were talking about, dictates a lot of what a person thinks about things. Okay, it dictates, and to a varying degree, we see that sometimes people are on the spectrum, right? Sometimes it's like really central to them. Sometimes it's kind of just an add-on to their life, right? What we're going to see, though, is that Judaism in particular, that's not an option. Okay, it's 100% or 0%. Okay, but it is a worldview. It does dictate how you view the world, and by that I mean not just how you behave. Okay, a lot of times we relegate religions to like having moral codes, right? And that's pretty much it, or maybe some belief in some metaphysical reality, and that's about it. But religions are systems with truth claims about reality. Okay? All religions are like this. Okay? All religions are like this. They have specific claims about the nature of reality. So, big questions that we have about life, like what are we here for? What's our purpose? Where did the world come from? Right? Is there a God? Is there not a God? Okay, these questions are like the biggies, right? The big questions about life. Religions seek to answer that in different ways, and they make different claims about what those answers are, right? So some religions, for example, will say there are many gods, right? Polytheism, okay? Many gods. Some religions will say there's not really any God per se, but like everything that's in nature is divine, okay? Or some will say none of that's true. There is more like a state of being that once you achieve that, then you've accomplished your goal in life. But there's no like God as we would think of God, okay? I mean, these are very specific religions. Hinduism, Buddhism, I mean, a lot of Eastern religions have this sort of like non-personal force, okay? I mean, they differ a lot in their claims about reality. They differ a lot in their claims about reality about the world as well, and about humans, okay? And their humans' relationship with each other, and with God, if he, she, or it exists, right? A lot of this stuff. So if you see the world that way, I mean, think about it. Somebody that thinks that there is a God, and somebody that thinks that there's no God, there's just a force of some kind out there, those people are going to see the world and everything in it in different ways. Yes? You tracking? Okay? So these are ways that people view reality, okay? They're world views, the ways in which you see the world. And all religions fall into this category, okay? So whether you're Christian or Muslim or whatever, that is a way of viewing the world. It can be central to you, it can be not central to you, but you do see the world through that lens, okay? So they make claims about the way the world is, and then after that, there's practices and habits that follow from those claims. Okay, so if you think that there's a God, and if you think that he, she, or it is a certain way, then you're going to behave a certain way based on that knowledge, right? So that's where actions of religions, right, behavioral, moral codes and stuff, that's where they come from, theoretically. They're supposed to be based on things that you think about reality, okay, conclusions that you already have about the way that reality is. So some of their claims are metaphysical, meaning they're about states of reality or states of being, or even God, for example, right, is generally considered to not be a physical being, okay? That's part of what makes he, she, or it God, is that it's not physical, okay? So some of their claims are metaphysical in nature, but they are accessible, okay? A good solid religious system, and the ones that have endured for so long, are the ones that have claims that are able to be assessed by people looking to join them or people that are adherents now. Okay, so if you're a member or an adherent to a particular religion, you ought to look at the claims that your religion makes and assess them. See whether or not they make sense, whether or not they're reasonable, whether or not you have reasons for thinking that's true, whether or not they match with reality would be a good place to start. Okay, if they require you to think something that doesn't match with anything you see out here, that's a warning flag. Okay, that's a warning flag. But all their claims should be accessible, that you should be able to examine them and put them to the test. Okay? Another thing you need to know is that religious systems ought to be kept separate from the people that practice them. So what we're talking about here is two religious systems, Judaism and Christianity, and there are lots and lots and lots and lots of people that practice Judaism and practice Christianity. Okay? So that's separate. Okay? Their practice and the way that they practice that can be really crappy or really great. Right? We know people that claim to be Christian, right, and are the worst people we know, okay? And other people that claim to think that God is a hedonistic monster, and they're great people, right? So this has nothing to do with your experiences of people that practice these religions. All we're talking about here is the claims of the system itself. Does that make sense? Okay? So don't attach in your mind experiences that you might have or pictures of people that you know, right? And you're like, that's not what they do. Okay? We're not talking about people's practicing of these religions. We're just talking about what the religious system claims. That's unchangeable. People practice that in better or worse ways than from each other, right? Some people better than others. Okay? But what the goal is to practice what the system states. Does that make sense to you? You guys with me so far? You getting kind of a read on this whole, like, what religion is type thing? You good? Questions? No? Okay, good. Okay, Judaism and Christianity are not the same thing. Okay? It's not like Christianity is like a version of Judaism, or Judaism is a version of Christianity. They're closely related in the sense that one kind of came out of another one, but they make different claims. Okay, different truth claims. They're different systems. Okay, which is part of the reason that caused a whole lot of trouble, which we'll talk about in a second. They do make some similar claims about reality. Okay, so just because we're going to start kind of in the middle, if we're thinking about the Bible, right, the 66 books of the Protestant Bible, what you've got is the Old Testament. Okay, the 39 books of the Old Testament is what Judaism will accept as authoritative along with some other writings. Okay. And then the New Testament is what Christianity accepts. So Judaism doesn't accept the New Testament at all. Okay? So we're going to start kind of in the middle of the story as far as like the Bible is concerned. So those of you that are familiar with the Bible, we're going to start in the middle. So to start with, and before we get to the story of Judaism, let's back up and talk about like the few claims about reality that Christianity and Judaism share. Okay, they do share some similarities. So here are some, okay? There is one, this is what they claim. There is one real, eternal, personal, existing God. Think about all those words. One real, eternal, personal, existing God who created the universe. Both systems say, yes, that's true, okay? Created the universe, therefore, outside, they use masculine pronouns to refer to God, so he is outside the universe, okay? Humans were created as well by this God. They're created as the crowning achievement, okay, of his creation, the best thing possible, okay? They were created with free will, with rational thinking, with relationality, and morality. Now, I know that other animals have relationality, right? Some have rational thinking, okay? But it's a different quality in humans, okay, and a different quantity in humans than it is in other animals, okay? So, humans were created with free will, rational thinking, relationality, and morality in order to rule the world in perfection. That's the claim they make, okay? Humans freely chose to take a different path to that rulership of the world, which resulted in a couple of things. A broken relationship with God, okay? And an inability to accomplish what they were created for. So they're created to rule the world and to rule a perfect world, okay? But now that because they chose to try to do that in a different way than God had set that out for, now they have an inability to do that, okay? So this changed them, this free choice that they made changed them, and these religions describe it as harming them in such a fundamental way that now all humans also have to choose to reconcile themselves to God, okay? To reform the people of God, okay, since the first one, we have free creatures that are freely able to choose right or wrong, right? They chose the wrong one. So to reform the people of God then, the Israelites were chosen, okay? Israelites were chosen as a nation, as a group of people, okay? An ethnic group, okay? To represent humanity. So they were chosen as a group to represent all of humanity. And God had dealings with just them, okay? In order to represent humanity and to bring about through that particular family, okay, just a literal biological descendant, okay, a perfect human whose life would do what was supposed to be done at the beginning. Okay, those are the claims that we share. There's a few others, but that's the claims about reality. And those are the ones that Christianity and Judaism share. Okay, so pause for a second before we talk about Judaism needs to know, just so that you understand where I get this information. I have a bachelor's degree in English and religious studies, but then I have a master's degree in something called apologetics, which is a defense of the truth claims of a particular religion. All major religions have apologists. Okay, it comes from the Greek word apologia, which means to give an answer for, to give a defense of. Okay, so all major religions have apologists, right? My religion is Christianity. So I've been educated in a lot of philosophy, a lot of theology, a lot of history. Okay, so my entire master's degree is in that. So this is in my wheelhouse. So just so you know where I'm coming from there. Okay, so let's talk about Judaism. Some need to know stuff about Judaism first, and then we're going to talk about origins, and then we'll move on to Christianity. Okay, this is going to kind of go through in a sort of chronological fashion because Christianity comes after Judaism in a way. It's not as old as Judaism is. Okay, so when we talk about the lay of the land, this map here will help us figure out where we are. Okay, this is all like real stuff. Okay, it's all history stuff for the most part. So this is where it took place. You all know where you are in the world, right? This is Africa. Okay, this is Europe, Western Europe. Asia's over that way. Okay, so we're talking about mainly this area right here. Okay, in the center. Let's zoom in on it just a little bit. If you see like right here, it says Israel, and right where my little pointer is pointing is Jerusalem. Okay, it's about that big from the map. Okay, but the area we're talking about is in this area. Okay, most of the events that we're going to talk about as far as Judaism are concerned took place here, and then mostly here. Okay, a little bit over in Egypt, but here. And then same thing with Christianity, started here and then went out mostly this way. Okay, just so I'm a big picture person, so if I can kind of see it, that kind of helps me. So that's what we're talking about. So we're going to start with a couple of things you need to know about Judaism. First, you need to know about covenants. Okay, if you're going to talk about Judaism, you got to talk about covenants. Okay, a covenant is kind of like a contract on steroids. Okay, a covenant is agreement between two parties that was mortally binding. Okay, it was like a life or death issue. In fact, the way that they ratified covenants was to kill an animal, cut it in half, and walk in between the halves, and basically saying, "Let it be to me what I've done to this animal if I break this agreement." I mean, it's a serious deal. Okay, serious deal. That's how they ratified covenants. It was a really big deal, and it was a life or death thing. Okay. The thing with Judaism is that it started when God made a covenant. Now, Yahweh is the name for in Judaism. Yahweh made a covenant with Abraham. Okay. So think about it. Usually, it's supposed to be between two equal parties, but now we've got like an eternally existing being making a covenant with a created being, right? What? Craziness. Okay, so Yahweh made a covenant with Abraham, and that's basically where Judaism starts. Okay, it's in the middle of the book of Genesis if you're thinking about where it is in the Bible. Arian?
How do you spell that?
Yahweh?
Yeah.
Like this. Yeah. We think. Because the name of God is so sacred in Jewish literature that they took out the vowels when it was printed so that you couldn't, or when people wrote stuff down, so that you couldn't say it out loud, because you can't speak without vowels, really. And so that's our best guess. Yeah. Yeah, pretty close. Okay, so covenant. So you need to know that Yahweh and Abraham made a covenant that included all of Abraham's descendants. Okay, that would be known as the Israelites. This covenant came with a promise that this would be like a huge nation. That they would. In fact, he took them outside. Yahweh took Abraham outside and said, "Look at the stars. Look at the sand. Your descendants will be more than these." Okay, huge, right? Huge. He didn't have any children at the time, which was really crazy. But like, you don't have any kids now, but look, you're going to have all these kids, right? By the time I'm done with you, your descendants will outnumber the stars. And it also came with a promise and a hope that eventually this family, okay, which started as a biological family, this family would eventually rule the world. Remember, right? The claim is that the Israelites were chosen by Yahweh to represent humanity, what humanity was supposed to do at the beginning, right? So your descendants are going to outnumber the stars, and you're going to eventually rule the world. Pretty cool promise, right? That's something to hang your hat on, okay? So because of that, then, this was so ingrained. I mean, when Yahweh makes a covenant with somebody, right? I mean, that's a story you keep telling, okay? This was so ingrained in the DNA, okay, in the identity, literally the DNA, right? Because it's his descendants. So ingrained in the DNA that it became this story, this characteristic of Israelites, that they were the people that Yahweh had made a covenant with. It was such an integral part of their identity that you can't separate that out. So there was always this looking forward to this hope that eventually they would rule the world. Eventually they wouldn't be subjugated by other foreign powers. Eventually this would be the real deal. Okay, that was their identity. That was like ingrained in them from the beginning. Okay, part of who they were as a nation. Okay, another thing you need to know, monotheism, which we talked about this before. When we talk about Judaism, you got to know monotheism, because at this point, this is really different from, like, say, right, we're over here, okay? Abraham really started up here and then traveled down this way. But when we talk about, like, Egypt, right, and Egyptian gods, okay, many, right? Most other major world powers and other cultures had a multiplicity of gods. So something that really set them apart was this idea that there's only one true God, the others are false gods. There's only one, right? This is weird, okay? Then they were like, how is that possible to have one being that's like in charge of everything? That's weird. That was weird in that time. Okay, another thing you need to know about Judaism is Messiah, the concept of Messiah, okay? When you read in any kind of biblical text or anything having to do with Christianity or whatever, and you read the word Christ, that's not Jesus' last name, okay? It's his title, and it's the Greek word for Messiah. Okay, Messiah means, generally speaking, anointed one, okay, or chosen one. There were many other people, 9 that I count in the, before from like 167 BCE to 100 CE, like 9 at least major figures that claimed to be Messiah. Okay, so Jesus of Nazareth wasn't the only one that claimed to be the Messiah. But Messiah is something that is promised, something that the Jews were waiting for, along with this, like, we're going to rule the world, we're going to be in charge, this is going to be great, we're Yahweh's people, this is awesome, we're like going to be top dog. In order to make that happen, there needed to be some kind of leader that would rise up and make that happen. Does that make sense? Okay? So, I mean, Abraham's job was basically to start building the family, but eventually when they got numerous enough, they're waiting for this person to, like, lead them into victory. Okay? So that's God's anointed one. That's the Messiah. And so they're waiting for that figure to come. Okay? That's part of what identifies Judaism, is this waiting for Messiah. It's prophesied, hundreds and hundreds of prophecies in the prophets books, the prophet books like Isaiah, Jeremiah, those, okay, about what this Messiah will do, where he will come from, what he's like, that kind of stuff. All right? So these ideas about Judaism are not just religious, okay? They're cultural, they're political, okay? This is like an all-encompassing, this is a worldview. This is an all-encompassing thing. It doesn't just dictate whether or not you help little old ladies across the street, okay, whether or not you're a good person or like donate to charity or something like that. This is like who you are as a person thoroughly, okay, through and through who you are as a person, okay? It's kind of hard to like find something in our culture that is like that. But I mean, if you go to another, well, if people come to Oklahoma, let's say, those of you that are from here, I'm not originally from here, I've been here for about 7.5 years now. So when I come to Oklahoma, I'm like, it's got its own deal down here, right? You people are like, you got your, this is your space, and you got your the way you do things and say things, and like, right? It's like all part of who you are. You can't really like separate that out and say, well, this, and this is what makes me Oklahoman, right? But it's kind of an all-encompassing thing, right? That just makes you part. This is where you're from. This is your spot. It's kind of like that, but on a national scale. Okay, on a national scale. But it makes you who you are. That's what these ideas were that much ingrained. Okay, so that's what you got to know about Judaism. So now, as far as like the origins, we talked about the Abrahamic covenant. That's where it started. Okay, started with Abraham, God taking Abraham and saying, you're going to be the father of a great, great nation. There's so many cool stories in here that I'm having to like gloss over that are just ridiculously crazy. Okay, like Abraham at this point is like nearing 100, and his wife is a few years younger than that. I mean, and he says, you're going to have like a bunch of descendants. What? I mean, anybody that knows anything about biology know that don't happen. Okay, but it happened. She has a son, and it's, I mean, they're just stories like that that are like ridiculous claims where you're like, what, did that really happen? What is going on? It's pretty crazy. So that happens, okay? Now look, if you're gonna be like a nation, like Yahweh promised to Abraham, you gotta have three things, okay? You gotta have a leader, you gotta have a land, and you gotta have a law, okay? These three things are needed for you to be like a nation: leader, land, and law. So far, right now, Yahweh is the leader, right? He says, I'm in charge of making this covenant with you. Go forth and procreate, right? Go do your thing, okay? And then, but they don't have a land. He actually tells Abraham, who's up here somewhere in the Fertile Crescent right up here, he tells him to move towards a land that I will give you, is what he says, okay? Which eventually is going to be this area right here. So Abraham moves kind of closer down there, has several sons that have sons that enter into the time that's called the patriarchs. Okay, think if you're familiar with biblical names, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, right? Those people, okay? Those are all sons of Abraham, and grandsons and great-grandsons. Okay, Joseph, you remember in the coat of many colors, okay, and he gets sold into slavery? Does that kind of like ring a bell? Okay, so he gets taken to Egypt is where he ends up, right? Well, then there's a famine, and Abraham and all of his, well, not Abraham anymore, but like all of his family, right, which are now multiplying, okay, are like, what are we going to do? Oh, Egypt has food because Joseph's a genius. And so we're going to go down here and hang out down there for a while. Joseph welcomes them back with open arms. And they basically, the whole family just kind of camps out in Egypt for several years to wait out the famine. All right? The problem is that while they're down there, I mean, what else do you do during a famine? Lots and lots of kids are born. Okay? So we got the family's growing and growing and growing. Okay? So what happens is Joseph dies, and people in Egypt get nervous, right? About like, these people are getting numerous. What do? Aha, let's enslave them. That's what you do with people when you're scared of them. You make slaves out of them, right? So they enslaved these people for 400 years. Now, enter the time of Moses, okay? Moses rises up, basically, and says, all right, enough is enough. And he doesn't just get this idea, right? Yahweh throughout the Old Testament, it seems like, chooses to speak to certain people. Now, there's probably other people he spoke to that we just don't have records of, right? But this is the story where he basically selects like this leader, this chosen leader, to do things with his people, lead them somewhere or tell them something or something like that, okay? So we've got Abraham first, right? And then the patriarchs, Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph. And now Moses is kind of the rescuer, okay? Moses figures huge in Judaism. Moses is like the man in Judaism, okay? Because he rescued his people and led them out of Egypt across the Red Sea. They complained and got all salty, and so Yahweh made them wander around here in the desert for 40 years. And then they finally get back up to this land that God had given to Abraham, right? They get up here and run everybody else out and then settle here, okay? So finally they get here. So now in that process, we've got a land, right? We've got a leader, Yahweh. We've got a land, okay? That promised land right there. And now we have to have a law. Well, in the process of moving toward the promised land, Yahweh meets with Moses and gives him the law. Now, often we say that that's the Ten Commandments. That's like that much of the law. Okay, if you read the book of like Leviticus and Deuteronomy, okay, it's very tedious. Lots and lots and lots of laws. And a lot of them have to do with something called the tabernacle. Now, tabernacle is a word that means to meet together, okay? And Yahweh said for them to build a structure, a portable structure, and he would manifest himself there. Now, being an eternal, all-existing, right, all-powerful being, he can't be in one, he's everywhere all at once. So he can't be located in one spot. This is another philosophical thing we can talk about later if you want to. But he can't be in one spot. He has to be all in every spot. But he said, I'm going to manifest myself in this spot. So you build it exactly like I tell you to. Okay? So every time they moved, they packed up, took it with them, right? That was the deal. That was the precursor to something called the temple. Okay, the temple was where the people met with God. And a lot of the directions are about how do we approach God. Okay? God set this up at the beginning, right? When he created humans and said, go forth and do this. This is what I've created you to do. Humans said, I'd rather do it this way. Okay? And so now the approach to God is broken, right? And so the temple was supposed to be a temporary fix for that. Okay? You follow these rules, you do these things, and then you and I are on good terms. Okay? Us and like our nation and God are on good terms. Does that make sense? So the temple is central to them because that allows them to actually be on good terms with Yahweh. Okay? Really, really important. So later, when it gets destroyed, that's a tragedy in many, many ways. Okay? It's not just like a cool building, right? This is like their means to access Yahweh, and when that's gone, they can't. They literally can't follow rules that he has given them. That's a bad deal. It's a bad deal. Okay? So they're in their land. They establish a kingdom. Here we get like King David, if you remember him, Solomon, right? After that, Solomon had two sons that bickered about tax laws, really, and split the kingdom in half, and so now we have two kingdoms with two kings. And it just gets crazy. There's like king, and then someone assassinates somebody else, and then someone has a military coup, and like so many kings. Okay, Assyria is the world power that's up here. Okay? I mean, there's like stuff going on in the world, right, aside from this. Okay, so Assyria's up here doing their thing, taking over stuff and growing their empire. And they see the weakness down here, and they want to expand their empire, so they just come down and carry off the half of the kingdom. Well, y'all are coming with me, and they carry off people and move back up to here, okay? Which is bad, because now the family, right, which is now several thousand people, the family's divided, okay, and they don't have access to the temple, to their land, right, their land, their leader, their laws, they're not allowed to practice like their religion like they think they should. It's a bad deal. Later, Babylon takes over Assyria's empire, okay, comes down and takes over the rest of the kingdom. So now everybody's gone, and Babylon's in charge. Then Persia comes in. Oh, and they destroy the temple. Persia comes in and takes over Babylon. So like we've had like 3 huge exchanges of world powers in a short amount of time. I mean, huge empires, okay, that are taking over. And this is just like a drop in the bucket, right? These little guys down here. They just kind of took them because they were there, all right? So at that point, then everybody pretty much Jerusalem is sacked. Okay, there's basically no towns there. There are people left. It's not like a ghost. It's not like a ghost town desert region. Okay, I mean it's a little deserty, but like it's not like nobody's there. Probably about 25 in realistic terms. Probably about 25% of the people that live there were actually carried off. They have outlying farms and little villages and stuff like that, but they can't. It's difficult for them to survive without an infrastructure of a city and stuff like that. The most important thing was the temple is gone. Okay, temple is gone. So now we have like Jews all over the place. So they're over here, okay, far away from what God had promised them, right? Because remember, Yahweh had promised you're going to be a family, you're going to be in charge, and now they've been overtaken and run out of their own land, and their temple's been destroyed by not 1 but 3 world powers. Okay, way far from what they thought was going to happen. So like this is a bad deal. That hope that they're looking for is getting farther and farther away. And it continues to get farther because after this, now we have the times of the prophets, okay? Like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, Amos, Joel, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, right? All those guys, okay, are speaking about this exile thing, okay, about being carried off. It's that central to a lot of the Old Testament is talking about this event. Okay, so that's where we are. Then after that, the Old Testament pretty much ends. They come back eventually, but and they kind of rebuild the temple and like consecrate it again, but it's never the same because they're always making deals with world powers that are around them so that they don't get carried off again. Right? So they're like adopting religious practices, adopting cultural practices, right, to try to keep the peace with everybody so that they don't get carried off again. And maybe this is the way we can get to be a world power is by cooperating with those around us. Okay? Instead of, and that required them to disobey laws that Yahweh had given them. So not a good deal. Then we've got end of the Old Testament. There's about 400 years in between the end of the Old Testament and the start of the New Testament. Okay? Not much. There's a few like apocryphal books that give, First and Second Maccabees, for example, gives a pretty good history of what is in there, but the Protestant Bible doesn't include it in their Bible. Catholic Bibles do recognize books like that as authoritative. Historically, it's pretty good. So there's about 400 years in there where all sorts of nothing is recorded as far as Judaism is concerned, but all sorts of stuff happened in the world. Okay, Great Wall of China was built during that time, right? Stuff like that. So we've got all of these world powers. Okay. At this point, we have Greece over here, Athens, and Sparta. Without going into it, Athens, think education and art. Sparta, warrior people, right? They fight. You'd think the warriors would just overtake the scholars, but I guess it was a good fight because it ended up destroying both cities, really, both infrastructures. Alexander the Great's dad, King Philip, who was over here in Macedonia, saw that happening and seized his chance. Okay? Then, so he started becoming the world power, then handed it over to his son, Alexander the Great, who went crazy, right? And went that way. He went this way and this way, okay? So his empire extended all the way over like to India, okay, way over there, all right? Just taking over stuff and establishing Greek culture along the way, okay, Greek culture. So now we've got Greek-speaking people everywhere, right? Because he took with him, every time he conquered something, he left Greek people there to like start the little community, all right? It's called Hellenization. All right, so he dies and divides up his territory. There is 2 territories where the line runs right through Israel. Okay, one territory is here, one territory is here. Okay, Ptolemies and the Seleucids, if you want to know. So that never works well, having 5 people in charge. So they end up fighting, right? Crazy times. End up desecrating the temple that they had tried to rebuild. Jews got livid, obviously. Okay. And so fought back, and were actually then and won, and were actually self-ruled for 25 years. That is the only time from the time that they were a king, right, King David and all them, until 1948. That was the only time they were allowed to rule themselves. Everything after that, they are all under somebody different. So remember that claim, right? That promise about being a world power and like being in charge and being like Yahweh's people. That's a long time, right? From like 1st century to 1948. That's when they declared like independence as a country. Okay, so crazy times. That all happened. It's called the intertestamental period, as far as religion is concerned, because it's in between the testaments. Okay, in between the Old Testament, New Testament. All right, so enter at the beginning of the New Testament. Then we've got these. The beginning of the New Testament starts with these claims to like these 4 different stories about the same thing, and it's all the central character in the first 4 books of the New Testament is this guy called Jesus of Nazareth. Okay. The main claim about Jesus of Nazareth is that he claimed to be the Messiah, the promised leader that would like finally take his people out of bondage and all this kind of stuff. Again, remember, he's not the only one. There are several people before him, several people after him, okay? So things that you need to know about Christianity, just like we had things you need to know about Judaism. So you need to know about Jesus of Nazareth and his claims to messiahship, okay? when we talk about messiahship, there are 4 different things that Jews thought that the Messiah was. Okay? 4 different things they thought that he was. So the first one is, and I got like 7 pages just on messiahship, so I'm like condensing, okay? So the first one is that the Messiah would be the king of the Jews. Those are important. He'd be the king and be the king of the Jews. Okay? Remember, this is still like very much an ethnocentric type of a thinking. Okay? He promised it to Abraham and his descendants, which means it's a family thing. Okay? It's a biology thing. It's a DNA thing. Okay? This is a big deal. Especially after the divided kingdom, the exile, right? Nothing was ever the same after that. Okay? So we need a king that's going to be our king. Remember, law, leader, and land? We need a leader. Okay? He's going to be the king, and he's going to be our king, king of the Jews. Also, secondly, the Messiah would win a decisive battle over pagans. At this time, it would have been Rome. Okay, so after Alexander divided up his empire, and after they fought and it kind of fell apart, Rome moved in. Okay, at the beginning of the New Testament, we see Roman occupation of that whole area. So they're still kind of allowed to like be themselves. It's just they're occupied by Romans. Okay, there's just Romans everywhere on the street. There's Roman politics. They're kind of allowed to have their own politics, but they have to work together. Okay, they're occupied by Rome. Third thing that the Messiah would do or would be is that he would rebuild and or cleanse the temple. Okay, this is what they expected. Third thing is that they would rebuild or cleanse the temple. This is, again, remember, such a thick, like, internal part of who they are. This is what they're looking for, hoping for. This is who they've identified this person to be. Fourth, the Messiah would bring true justice and peace to the world. True justice and peace to the world. And by that they mean the kind of justice and peace that would never be overtaken by another world power. Again, we are the people, right? We're going to be in charge. Everything's going to be cool. Okay? This person, this figure, would be sent from God, okay, from Yahweh in order to do these things. That was the Jewish view of Messiah. That's what they're waiting for. Okay? So we have Jesus of Nazareth arrives on the scene. Very humble beginnings. He didn't start his ministry till he was around 30. Learned a trade to work with his hands as like a carpenter, which back then was probably more like a stonemason. Okay, that kind of thing. So very not glamorous job. Okay, and we don't have hardly anything. We have like 2 stories about his childhood, and that's about it. Okay. The rest of it starts when he begins his ministry around age 30. So his message then, he travels around and he starts causing problems because he starts saying stuff that people are like, say what now? And he starts saying stuff that people are concerned about religiously and politically. Okay, because remember we got this political idea of what it means to be a Jew, but then we also have Rome that's involved in there, right? Rome's in charge too, so they're a little concerned about if there's any unrest, they want to know to be able to calm things down, okay? So Jesus's message was largely when he speaks, okay, when he's telling parables or like saying stuff or making claims or whatever, he's generally talking to Israel. He's generally talking to Jews and saying, y'all missed the boat. Quit cooperating with other people. Quit like trying to make compromises on what you're supposed to be doing, okay? You blew it. You blew it. You were supposed to come back, rebuild the temple. You're supposed to, right? You blew it way back there because you ended up fighting and then getting carried off into exile, okay? So there's a lot of kind of chastising, okay? Because Israel, remember, was supposed to represent humanity. It was supposed to like rebuild the people of God to do what humans were created to do at the beginning, and they're not doing that, right? So Jesus comes on the scene and he's like, listen, you people this is not happening the way it's supposed to happen, okay? He eventually, that's very divisive for especially for Jewish religious leaders at the time. Think Pharisees, Sadducees, there's another group called Essenes, and there's another group called Zealots, and they all had like really different and political views about how things ought to be, okay? So he was eventually put to death by a really crazy form of execution called crucifixion. It's really brutal and very effective, and the Romans were experts, let me tell you. They were put to death because of a couple of reasons. One, the things he was saying religiously was blasphemy. Okay, he was saying things that claimed that he either was God or that he was from God. Okay, and you just don't do that, right? You don't claim that God told me to do this and expect people to take you seriously. I mean, this is like, that's a big deal. And for them who don't even say the word of God or like God's name out loud, right? Claiming to be God, claiming to have God's approval on him, and saying all these crazy things that's a really big deal. It's called blasphemy. Okay? Saying things about a divine being that's not true is kind of desecrating the divine being. And so that was punishable by death. So that was one of the reasons he was put to death. The other reason was because the political and religious leaders in Judaism were really worried about instability. Okay, he was causing a lot of problems, a lot of dissension. Some people were following him, some people weren't. He was making problems with families, problems with communities, right? And so there's a lot of like angst, okay? And so because of their cooperation with Rome, they decided, listen, we're just going to squelch this thing and nip it in the bud. Remember, this is not the first Messiah figure they've seen, okay? And so we're just going to calm this down. We don't want another riot like the last 5 guys we've seen, so let's just put him to death, okay? So that's the reason why he was executed. What is weird, though, is that that's not it's not the end of the story, because now we see, like, now we have the whole rest of the New Testament. And so something happened after his death, right, that caused this whole, like, some kind of a movement to start, okay? It wasn't just out of respect for his death, but there are two things that skeptics and critics and believers alike agree to. 2 things. One, that he definitely died. Okay, he was definitely dead. It wasn't like he fainted on the cross or something like that, and then, like, because there's a claim of that he rose, right, that he came back from the dead, okay? So they definitely agree that he died. Romans were very good at what they did as far as execution goes, okay? And they also agree that whatever happened, 3 days after his death, the tomb was empty. Okay, the tomb was empty. Whether the body got stolen, whether, people, like, took it and then said, hey, you rose from the dead. Okay, whatever happened, the tomb was empty. So he definitely died, and then the tomb was empty. You look up any reputable scholar and they'll say this. Okay? Whatever happened, it caused a couple of things to go into motion. Whatever happened after this particular guy that claimed to be Messiah died, like all the other guys before him and all the other guys after him, usually in some brutal military way, they died, okay? What happened after he died was that his disciples, like his closest group of followers that, like, really, like, thought he was the best thing since sliced bread, like, they followed him, and they ended up actually dying for this claim that he rose from the dead. No, he really, really did. Say he didn't, or I'll put you to death. No, he really did. And they put him to death. They all died a martyr's death for that claim. Okay? The other thing that happened was that his brother, James, as in the book of James, his brother, who thought he was nuts, like, Jesus had brothers and sisters as well, and they all, including his mother, thought he was crazy. They all were like, this guy's out to lunch. His brother converted and wrote the book of James, okay, and began, get this, remember the whole monotheistic thing about Jews? These are Jews, right? The whole monotheistic thing about Judaism, they began to worship Jesus of Nazareth as divine. Right? That's craziness. That's craziness, okay? So whatever happened after his death caused his brother, a hardcore Jew, to convert and to begin to worship him as divine and to recognize him as the Messiah. The other thing that happened was the conversion of somebody named Saul, who was a Pharisee. He's like the Jew of all Jews, okay? He knew his stuff. As far as Judaism and the law was concerned, he also was converted and began to follow Jesus as the Messiah. So whatever happened after his death, something happened to cause these things to happen. Obviously, Christianity claims that God rose him from the dead. Okay, he rose from the dead. So, okay. The New Testament book of Acts then describes the movement of this message about Jesus now is the Messiah. He is that leader, okay, that has been promised, right? Here we are, opening doors, let's happen, let's do this thing, right? Here we go. That message of follow him in order to be part of the people of God, in order to be, like, on good terms with God, don't have to go to the temple anymore. Instead, follow Jesus as the Messiah, okay? Do what he did, speak what he speaks, right? Behave like he behaved. That's how you approach God, okay? That's how you approach God now. It's not the temple, it's Jesus. In fact, there's a cool story about Jesus where he stands at the door, as a Jew, stands at the door of the temple, fashions, the text says, he fashioned a whip, which means he stood there and made it. I don't know if he braided together leather or something like that, but he took time to make a whip and then got mad and drove people out because they were corrupting the temple. And then he would not allow people to come in and sacrifice because he was trying to show that's done now. You don't have to do that anymore. Now I'm the representative. Now you follow me. Okay, now you access God through me, which is a really bold claim, right? And if your friends were like, hey, access God through me now, you'd think they were nuts, right? So the kind of like the seal of his deal, okay, was his resurrection from the dead. If that really happened, probably his other claims about stuff really happened too. But okay, so after that happened, right, we've got this whole thing about Jesus. Yes, some people think, yes, he really is the promised Messiah. Then that message goes out from Jerusalem out this way, mostly up this way, and then into modern-day Turkey, and then Greece, and then finally Rome. Rome is the center of the known world at this point, so if you want a message to get out, you get it to Rome, and then everybody knows it, okay? So Paul's journeys, Paul was finally martyred for his faith in Rome, okay? He was also a dual citizen. He was Jewish and he was Roman at the same time, so that allowed him a lot of opportunities. But he got the message pretty much almost single-handedly. He had a few helpers, but he established little groups of people that also thought that Jesus was the Messiah, and he did this by convincing them that Jesus really did rise from the dead and that he fulfilled prophecies. He looked at his life, looked at the miracles he did, and said, look, all those prophecies that were written about him way back then in the prophets, he fulfilled all of those. Those are the two main things that he did. He fulfilled prophecies and he rose from the dead. That was Paul's big message. And he did this by, if you read the book of Acts, by explaining, by proving, by arguing, right? It wasn't like a big old, like, no pun intended, come to Jesus meeting, okay? It was like let's sit down and I'm going to have a debate, okay? In like the Areopagus where people would sit and like stand up and take turns in a very orderly fashion and debate, okay? It wasn't like a fiery sermon. He just literally sat down and said, well, here, and here, so he is the Messiah. And some people were convinced and some weren't. But those that were convinced started forming groups all along the Mediterranean Sea there, okay? And then those groups formed other groups, and those became churches, okay? It wasn't until midway through Paul's ministry that they were actually called Christians. At first they were called followers of the way, but then they're called Christians after that because of the Greek name Christ, right? So they were literally Christ followers, Christians, okay? Little Christs, little followers of Jesus, okay? So that's where the name came from. So that's what the book of Acts is about. And then all the rest of the letters, which are mostly 13 written by Paul, are all to specific either people or specific churches, or gatherings. They're not really called churches, but they're called little gatherings, right? And they're for specific purposes, okay? And it shows, and you basically got to get through Hebrews in order to really see the development of Christian doctrine. So by the end, we get to Hebrews and James, and now we're starting to talk about how you ought to behave as somebody who follows the Messiah. But this whole beginning part of the New Testament and the whole start of Christianity was all about, what do you think about Jesus? Do you think he was the Messiah? Do you think he wasn't the Messiah? Okay, that's the watershed issue. And if you're not sure, look at his resurrection. Look at the fulfilled prophecies. That was Paul's message. Okay? If you are sure, then this is how you ought to behave. This is how you ought to respond to things like persecution from other pagan forces, right? But the big deal was Jesus now offered this he opened the door so that anybody could access God. Remember, before it was just Jews, right? You had to be part of the right family, the right ethnicity in order to do this. Now anybody who followed Jesus as Messiah could choose to follow and become part of this people of God, this new humanity that was supposed to do what humanity was supposed to do at the beginning. Okay? Anybody's open to that now. Okay? So that was a pretty big deal. So that's where Judaism and Christianity diverge. Okay? Judaism and Christianity separate over the issue of whether or not Jesus is the Messiah. Christianity says yes. Judaism says no, and they still are waiting. Okay? Jews are still waiting for their Messiah. Christianity says he came, and now anybody can approach God. Okay? If you follow Jesus as the Messiah, if you recognize he's the Messiah. Okay? So that's the main difference where those two. Now, the practice of that then differs, right? You differ in one key doctrine, and then your practice is going to be really different. Okay? So that's where Jews and Christians differ the most. So, current state of affairs. Main difference, like I said, for Christianity, main difference is the identity of Jesus of Nazareth. Christians believe that his perfect life, they believe that he led a perfect life, he fulfilled prophecies, and he rose from the dead. And that all proved that he was God's anointed one. Okay? The perfect human. What humans are supposed to be. Okay? He was the anointed one. And incidentally, Christianity also believes that Jesus is something called the incarnation, that Jesus is God incarnate. Okay, it means God put on flesh. All right. To try to explain that would mean I have to explain to you the doctrine of the Trinity, which is really difficult. So, in 10 minutes, I'm not going to do it. But if you have questions, you can always come talk to me about it. It's like one of my favorite things to talk about. He was the anointed one. He did what humans at first did not do. Okay, he freely responded to God as a human with free will. He freely responded to God according to how they were created. Right? What he was created to do. This is part of the claim of Christianity. Right? Humans were created to do certain things, to be certain ways. Okay, and Jesus did that. Where everyone else failed, he did it. So Christianity also now claims as a system, remember, maybe not as a practice, because people practice in different ways and some people practice it poorly, frankly. The Christianity as a system, though, claims that Jesus is now, right now, he exists, okay, exists, he's in heaven with God, and that he is the reigning king of the world. He's in charge. And so eventually he's going to return at some point to finalize his rule. But right now, those who follow him are expanding his kingdom, okay? So we're trying to, people who are Christians and are following him, are trying to expand his kingdom by speaking the truth in certain areas, by trying to convince other people to also recognize him as the Messiah, right? And then eventually he'll come and finalize his rule, okay? And they also do it, Christians also do it by abiding by the values of the kingdom, and that's going to dictate their behavior a lot. Okay? As far as Judaism is concerned, right now Jews are still waiting for that promised Messiah because of the continued occupation of their land. I mean, yes, they're an independent nation now since 1948, like I mentioned, but there, as you know, lots and lots of turmoil, lots of different ethnic groups in that area. Okay? So there's still, because of that occupation of their land and because of the desecration of the temple, they still haven't rebuilt a temple, okay? So because of that, they cannot practice the sacrificial system like they were commanded to, okay? They still abide by all other laws. And there's different branches of Judaism. Some Reform Jews don't, but Orthodox Jews do, okay? But they abide by all of the tenets of the law, festivals, all that feast and stuff. They still consider themselves generally to be kind of in exile, okay? They never have really come back from that, from being decimated by that, by coming in and carrying off of the Assyrians and Babylonians, okay? They still kind of consider themselves to be scattered. They call it a diaspora, right? People that are Jews that are scattered and not in their land, remember? Because land, leader, and law. We've got Jews all over the place. They're not home, okay? They're not here. They're not in where they're supposed to be. And so they still consider themselves to be in exile. They're all separated out, and they're awaiting the coming of the Messiah who will conquer the world and reinstate them as God's people. Okay? So that's kind of where it's at now. So when you see people praying at like the Wailing Wall, for example, you'll see them kind of rocking back and forth. They're dressed like in black hats, right? Those are with long beards. Okay, those are Orthodox Jews, and they are praying for the Messiah to come. Okay, praying for the Messiah to come. And that wall there is a leftover wall of the temple, and that's why they're praying there, because that's what's left of the temple. So when you see like people sticking little notes in there and stuff like that, and Orthodox Jews praying, that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing. Okay, so that's Judaism. And then do you understand where Judaism and Christianity diverge? Do you understand the main difference in claims about reality between those two things? Okay, different systems. Questions or comments or things you didn't know or Things you still want to know.
So when what's his name went to Rome, is that why Romans are Catholics or some form of Christianity? They converted them to?
No, not necessarily. Initially, like probably the biggest figure in that would be Constantine, which was several hundred years after this happened, and he claimed Christianity, and then after that we've got all this crazy stuff with like the Church of England and that kind of stuff. But yeah, the main difference between Catholics and Protestants is they recognize the leader of the church. They think that the leader of the church ought to be a descendant of Peter, which is one of Jesus' disciples, who he spoke to and said, on this rock, which his name means rock, but on this rock I will build my church. And so the head of the church then ought to be a descendant of Peter. And so that's where the Pope comes from. Okay, so the Pope needs to be a descendant of Peter, or selected by, from a group. So that's where Protestantism and Christianity diverge. Other questions? That's a good question. Miss Blake, what else? I did pretty good. I said a lot of words, but I'm early.
Yeah.
Look at me.
10 whole minutes.
I know. If you guys do have any questions about any of this stuff, I know it's like, well, I have questions, but no, I'm not going to go to the trouble to go to somebody's office and ask. Please do anyway, okay? If you have questions about other religions, I do teach a world religions course as well, so if you have questions about other world religions, it's an online course, but I teach it in the spring. So it's, going to be open for enrollment here in a couple
I do have a question.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Is there like an original Bible, like in a museum anywhere?
No, for a couple of reasons. One, the documents, the canon of the Old Testament was completed and actually translated from Hebrew into Greek about 200 years before Christ. So the Old Testament's been that way for a long, long time, right? And then the New Testament, none of the original autographs remain, but we have really, really old copies, like first century copies within decades of when they were written. Good question, though. Other questions?
Is your religious class just online?
World religions? It is. Mm-hmm. What else? For you, anyway.
Now's your
Now's
time.
your chance.
Now's your time.
Just remember that when you think about your own religion, if you have one, or you think about, because probably if you don't, you know somebody that does, recognize that on whatever what's this called, spectrum, okay, somewhere on that spectrum, that guides the way that you or they think, okay? It becomes a lens through which you see the world. So the key is not just to go, man, it's your opinion, awesome, you got that, I got this, sweet, because religions make different claims about reality. They can't all be true. They could all be false. We could all have it wrong, right? But they can't all be true, because one says there's a God, one says there's many gods, one says there's no God, right? And those can't all be right. Okay, one of them's right, or all of them are wrong. So be aware that you may have an opinion, and your opinion may be wrong. Someone else's opinion may be wrong. You all should have opinions about this stuff, but try to make your opinions match with reality, okay? Try to make your worldview reasonable. So that means you have reasons for thinking what you think and guiding your actions. You're not just shooting from the hip all the time. Does that make sense? Religions are really powerful things. They really are.
I do enjoy ending with saying, you're probably all wrong about that. I enjoy that. Remember, you could be wrong about a lot of things. Good. So real quickly before we head out, remember on Thursday we will kind of wrap this up. If we have any questions, we might have